everyone. My name is Tatiana Kolavu. Welcome. I am hosting a live on the Stronger Live LinkedIn Live that we have. Stronger is the newsletter that I produced that this past month was all about resilience strategies. I'm so excited for today's event. And if you are here with us, we love to know where you're from. I always say we're going to make a map and list all the different countries and parts of the globe that you're coming in from. And I'd like to post that, but that's sort of in a to-do list for now. So I see some New York City and Constance. My wonderful guest and I were just there this past week and had some great experience in your bustling, very amazingly energizing big city. So resilience strategies are tips and drills that we need to run as life happens. We've all heard the VUCA, the VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that life brings to us. So we have yet another acronym. But you know what? I say bring it. Life is a training arena where we get to practice a lot of our skills and be able to become stronger for the ones to come. California, Arizona, Mexico, and Charlotte, I hope you're doing okay in Charlotte. We've got some hurricanes coming through our country at this time. So hopefully you all have not been traveling. Estonia, the unicorn capital of the world. I love that line. So if you just joined us, we're talking about resilience strategies that help us become stronger in dealing with adversity. And people will say resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity. As you'll hear us talk about here today with my guest, resilience is really the ability to bounce forward and grow forward from adversity. So as we get started, and as you're coming in, Egypt, thanks for her joining, and Dominica, wonderful. I wanted to introduce my amazing guest, and it's the one and only resilience queen, Gemma Lee Roberts. And Shelby, we can bring Gemma in. I asked Gemma if she would like for me to be bragging on her while she's on camera. I get embarrassed when that happens a little. But let me talk about Gemma by the numbers just a little bit. 13 courses as a LinkedIn instructor, one of which is insanely popular on emotional intelligence. Of course, resilience. Of course, resilience as a leader, anything from how to, I wrote down team innovation and growth mindset and giving feedback. Because you see, Gemma is a chartered psychologist. Companies hire her to come in and make them well or make them stronger, as we say. So she has so much experience working with teams and individuals, Fortune 100 companies from what I saw. Also, Gemma has an amazing newsletter called Mindset Matters. Another number that I just looked at as of today, Gemma, 56 editions. So you've produced 56 pieces of incredible content. Get this, everyone. I'm going to pull an Austin Powers, 582,000 subscribers. And if you're not one of those subscribers, we're dropping the Mindset Matters newsletter on the link here so you can follow it. Finally, Gemma has a very informative and ever evolving website called The Resilience Edge, and all of her work and her research is about resilience. So Gemma, a very big thank you for joining us today. So good to have you coming in from the UK. It's evening tea time there. And tell us a little bit about what's the latest work that you're doing on resilience.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so when I said I don't mind being in the room, when you talk about my work, I didn't know it was going to be that amazing. So thank you. What an intro.
My pleasure.
Wow, I don't know where to go from that. So in terms of the work that I've been doing lately, so obviously the newsletter is ongoing on LinkedIn. That's something that has been growing, and it kind of had a bit of a life of its own there for a while when it was all kind of ramping up. And off the back of that, I wrote a book as well. So again, called Mindset Matters.
Excuse me. Yes. On the side note, for everyone that's watching too, and if you think, how does she do it? Gemma also has a 5.5 and a 2.5-year-old. Do I get their?
So 5 and 3.
5 and 3, absolutely.
Just 5 and 3. Yeah.
5 and 3, that is action-packed for the ones of you that have little ones. This is an insane accomplishment. But this, on top of running a business, having two little ones, it's a lot.
It is a lot, actually. And I'm not going to talk about it necessarily today, but at some point soon, I'm actually going to talk a bit about that kind of journey and how we made all that happen as a family. But the work that I've been doing, so I've literally just handed in my doctorate thesis, and it's on resilience and what are the factors that can help us to be resilient or can hinder resilience. And it's been really interesting. I haven't spoken about the research yet, so I haven't even kind of in a public forum broached that yet.
That's another book, right?
Potentially, but it's kind of it's made it very clear that I don't know if we've been asking the right questions about resilience, and I don't know if we've been focusing on the whole picture, because you'll know this, Tatiana, quite often when we're helping people with resilience, we're talking to them about strategies, things they can do to boost their resilience, and that's really important. It's really, really, really important that we're equipping people with the tools to be able to deal with challenges, to grow stronger, to bounce forward. But equally, there's a big piece in it which I don't think we've really broached very much in the research yet, which is around context and situation and environment. And that a lot of that came out in my research. So yes, I think a good place to start is always, what can you do as an individual to boost your resilience? And we both work in that world. It's kind of never ending in terms of our journey to keep building resilience and to keep, I guess, kind of adding these strategies to our toolkit about, practices, habits, that kind of thing. But we also need to focus on what's going on around us as well, and potentially making some changes there as well if things aren't working, or I guess knowing where we can make changes and where we can't as well. And I think that's the bit that can be a bit trickier, because, we're talking about organizations, potentially, we're talking about society, we're talking about, anything going on around us. But it's important that we kind of focus on some of those things as well, I think, when we're talking about resilience.
And even though we talk about resilience in the workplace, our life is not in compartments. Everything influences everything. So we may have a personal event that makes us feel more resilient, or nearly breaks us. My personal story with our son being very sick last summer, and talking a lot about resilience. I think sometimes you train in one arena, you can be stronger, and then you can use some of those skills in another arena or context. Or some of the things that are happening with volatility and uncertainty and ambiguity in the work world, if we have had some personal, much more serious things, you're like, meh, that's going to pass. I'm not going to spend my energy, or I will be probably a little bit more wise about how I approach this. I want to say hello to all of our friends from, again, so many different parts, San Antonio and Saudi Arabia. You all are staying up late to be part of that show. Our friends in Pakistan and Chile and Austria, I'm always honored that you are making this part of your time. So in your research on resilience, you looked at, I know in the book, you talk a lot about the context may change, and don't think that you can say my resilience score is a 78 if there was even a way to measure that. And I'm going to keep boosting it, because we always try to think of becoming better versions of ourselves. And what you're saying is, depending what's happening, you may be in a much lower state and level of resilience, and at times you may come up much stronger, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Our resilience, all of us, me included, this is my research area. It goes up and down every day, and multiple times throughout the day, potentially. It's really, and the really tricky thing about teaching people how to be more resilient is you're never done. You're never resilient. You can't just tick it off your list and say, yep, got that. I'm resilient. Throw anything you want at me. Next thing, because there's always new challenges. There's always new things happening. And I think part of building resilience is understanding ourselves better as well. So we're kind of on a continual journey of understanding more about ourselves, our triggers, our responses to things, our emotions, our feelings, why some challenges are kind of big deals for us and other times they're not. We need to be learning about ourselves all the time. And also on top of that, we also need to be picking up different strategies to help with that as well, because we're learning more. Every time we face a new challenge or a new obstacle, we're learning more about ourselves, and we're learning more about ways that we can deal with that scenario, or things that we can do.
But isn't that a good strategy? And I have a course on building resilience, and because of my background, I see things sort of through the lens of athletic performance and think of how do we get stronger. And I talk about an adverse event is going to happen. You may lose a job, lose a client, really mess up in public, or do have something happen. The way to build resilience is try to sort of train yourself to be more ready, but also the learning, as you say, is do we take time to say, this happened, how did I deal with it, where was my mindset, what was helpful, what was not, sort of this resilience debrief that we try to do afterwards, sort of a post-mortem, as we say, debrief, which maybe you do with a friend. You may ask me those questions. How did you feel? How did you overcome? What helped? And that actually helps me, or I can think helps everybody, really be more self-aware of what works for them in that context.
I think, and that's really important. We have to be reflecting on what's happening and how we're responding. And I love the context. I love the work that you do around kind of looking at the physical side of resilience as well, and the parallels there. And that's a brilliant course, by the way. So anyone that wants to learn a bit more about resilience, the Building Resilience course on LinkedIn Learn is brilliant. But I think, we should always be learning, and the goal of learning about resilience or building your resilience, weirdly, though I say this, the goal should never be to be resilient. Because if that's your goal, you're never going to reach it. Because some days you might be, and some days your resilience reserves will be lower. They go up and down. It's like a reservoir of water. Sometimes the levels are high, sometimes the levels are lower. So the goal really, if you're looking to be able to deal with challenges better in the future, or learn from obstacles that you're facing, the goal really should be to learn as many strategies as you can to help you be resilient in the moment. So you might need that strategy today, you might need it in 2 years' time, we might never need it, who knows? But the goal really is learning those strategies and tools that you can use, and you've got them in your back pocket when you need them. Test them out, see what works, adapt things, tweak things, try it again. That's the goal. The goal isn't to be the most resilient person you can be every single day. It's not achievable.
And not only that, who wants to be the most resilient person? Because that means you've swam in the deep waters without a life jacket, and it has been painful. So very resilient people have had tragic and very, very difficult experiences. I don't want to be that person. I'd rather sort of be in the training arena too. I see a comment here. It says, most important to build resilience is first, our friend here, to be smart enough to set the priority in lifestyle. And this touches upon a lot of the things that you mentioned, and I'll talk a little about the 6 pillars in the resilience book. But I also talk about this as taking care of yourself. If you lead a lifestyle that allows for a few breaks and allows for you to look forward and say, this is going to be a hard week, month, quarter, whatever. What am I going to do to balance my energy, my endurance, and my ability not to lose it? So I think that's what Mahbub is mentioning here specifically, right?
I agree, and I think it's something that we need to focus on, and it's I think that's a good point, that we do need some of that balance as well, and we need to, I guess, constantly be evolving.
Absolutely. And growing. Absolutely. We have a friend, Rena, is talking about her brother is in the path of the hurricane. She hasn't heard from him. You can control, Rena, your mindset on staying positive, maybe do some things that distract you a little bit. Your heart is always going to be with him and be thinking of him, but you cannot control the phone lines and the connections here as we do. You talk a little bit about, in your book specifically, talking about positivity. Can you talk a little bit about that? For Rena, for example, how does she remain positive? Because I'm Greek. I think it's in our genes to catastrophize, and I try to catch myself all the time not to do that. And as I've gotten older, I try to recognize that and do that. But what can Rena do to build up that positivity for when she needs it?
It's a really delicate balance. And I talk a little bit about this in the book, in that it's important that we bring some positivity, so we remain optimistic. There's so many health benefits associated with that.
Sure.
But equally, I talk about kind of realistic optimism. So having your head in the clouds and thinking, oh, it's fine, everything will work out, this kind of false optimism all
Yeah.
the time doesn't really, or false positivity doesn't really help, because it's not real. And actually, subconsciously, we probably know that's not real, thinking, oh, everything's going to be fine. And, I'm pretty sure lots of us will have heard of the term toxic positivity, where we're projecting something all the time that's seems super positive, but actually under the surface, it might not be. And that can be really damaging. So
Mhm.
it's really important to get this balance. And my best piece of advice here is, where you can, take the optimistic approach. So if you have a choice, and you can take a step back and consider how you're thinking about a situation, try and take the most optimistic approach. So, wait till you hear some kind of news, or if you're thinking this could happen or that could happen. And, quite a lot of us will gravitate towards the negative thing that could happen. So you can catch
Mhm.
yourself
Of
thinking this,
course.
and actually try and, what if the best case scenario happens? But
Yeah.
equally, it's important to have like a grip on reality as well, because otherwise we're not living in the real world, and that can
Yeah.
be really damaging psychologically. And I think things like, worrying about someone's safety, you know, as much as I'm an advocate for building resilience, that's not always the answer either.
Mhm.
Sometimes, we have to focus on, or we have to let our emotions be what they need to be, and we need to
Put them out.
accept that
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
feels overwhelming, or um really upsetting, and that's okay as well. I think I talk about this a little bit in the book, that sometimes we need to break down before we
Yeah.
can kind of build ourselves back up again. Sometimes
Mhm.
that's part of resilience. It's not
Mhm.
always pushing through. It's not
Mhm.
always, but this is why I say it's a delicate balance, and why it's important that you get to know yourself, and where
Sure.
you are. Sometimes we need to change our thinking, potentially, to get a better outcome for ourselves. Sometimes we need to accept it, and we need to accept that things are really challenging, and deal with that scenario. So it's quite a fine line to
It
try and
is.
learn where your line is.
And I find that it helps if you cannot find the positivity for a while, call somebody in your advisory board who is that voice and who is that person that can help you. In Rita's case, she's been through a hurricane 5, so I'm sure there's some stress that comes up having experienced some of this and thinking of her brother. So she's even more aware of what is happening. Back to the setbacks in the workplace, unlike the hurricane example, I agree that you have to stop and say, this sucks. And I'm going to
Mhm.
organize my pity party and be the top party goer for this. But you have to, at some point, end it and move on. And as you said, acknowledging the emotions and the feelings, that also is healthy. And in fact, it's something that's healthy to teach our children too. We can't say, move on, this happened and we need to get stronger. We need to allow that time. And depending on the context, on the setting, and all the emotions, sometimes that pity party lasts for a long time, or lasts longer than we want it to. So we have to be there specifically. We have one of our learners, John said, scheduling silence time every day helps me. Even time without distractions, no sound, nothing in my ears. Absolutely, John. We both talk about this being an important part of taking care of you and being able to know when you need that. But then hopefully you're in a setting where you can provide that. Gemma, what do you say as the work world is changing and companies are asking employees to come back to the work world? And in some cases, John probably would be frazzled if he wants quiet, no distraction, noise time. What do you tell our friends that may be in a situation where they can't get that?
This is a prime example of kind of the stuff that's come out in my research, of the things that are going on around us that we can't always change, we can't always control. And here you have a choice, really. You either have the choice of But there are a few choices. It's something you can broach potentially with your manager or with the organization, and see whether if there is any room for flexibility,
Mm.
or if it's kind of hard, there's a hard line, you have to be back in the office 100% of the time. If there is a bit of flexibility, then there's a bit of work potentially to do with managing your energy. So, i.e., okay, if there are days that I'm not going to get that quiet necessarily, from that
No
working
weekends
day, can I
there.
take it somewhere else? How am I going to work around this? Can I build it in somewhere else? But equally, you might find that actually long term, that's just not the right environment for you.
Mhm.
And you might need to make changes. So there are things that you can do yourself to be more resilient, but equally, if the environment or the context around you isn't working, you might have to at some point make some difficult decisions. Now, I'm not saying everyone has to go in and hand their notice in at work straight away.
Sure.
I live in the real world as well. I know we don't all have
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
options to do that. But what I'm saying is you could potentially work towards a change. You don't have to change overnight something in your environment, but it might be something you want to work towards. If there's something going on around you, whether that's a relationship or your working environment or your home environment or whatever it is, there might be things that you can kind of change longer term that you might need to work towards.
I'm going to bring in another comment from Kristen. She said, okay, at some point you need to walk away. And she's
Yep.
saying, I have a hard time knowing when that is, or do I keep staying and trying to change? And in the workplace setting, in my course, I talk about, sometimes the healthiest thing is to cut ties and walk away. If you've tried everything, I want for all of our learners to hear this. Your health and mental health is more important than anything in these situations. And sometimes you get clarity, and maybe sometimes you need your advisory board to ask you the tough questions that can help you move forward. So I think, Kristen, with some advice from your friends that know you well and can ask you some clarifying questions, you can make decisions. And how do you get better at that? You just have more experiences. It's part of that training cycle that Gemma talked about. It's constantly changing. We're getting so many comments. I'm having a hard time keeping it in line here too. So, how would you say, Gemma? One of the other 6 pillars, you talk about resilience being helped by confidence. People that are more adaptable are more resilient, more positive, have perspective, find their own mastery, find their own flow with their work, and finally build their stamina. Which of the things would you say builds resilience for someone who may be hearing this now, that can be more controllable? There's what I like about this book actually is that there's coaching and drills that, even though Gemma said it's not something you get better at, but you can remind yourself to constantly be practicing your skills. Which one is one of your favorite exercises from the book, Gemma, that you think helps?
I think my kind of broadest tip when it comes to building resilience, because a lot of these things are very specific. Some people will need to work on the confidence part, some people might want to work a bit more on the adaptability part. But I think on the other 6 pillars, or the other 4 pillars as well. But my biggest tip when it comes to building resilience, and the thing that I find most useful as well, is looking at challenges as an experiment. So rather than, and I call it like the experimental mindset. So when you're facing some kind of challenge or you're trying something new and that's really scary, a lot of us have this fear of failure. A lot of us don't know when to call it quits, or have some kind of perfectionism, or we're worried about doing the wrong thing, or sometimes we're worried about doing the right thing. Like, if this goes really well, how's that going to affect
Well,
me?
I was talking about Wander Hell.
Yeah,
It goes really well.
exactly.
Oh crap, it's going really well. Now I'm overwhelmed. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when we're facing challenges, the biggest tip I can have is this idea of an experimental mindset. And the idea is that you're not looking for the right answer. You're not looking to get things right. Because when we do something new or when we change something, quite often there is no right answer. It's like, dating, trying to find the perfect person, the right person. There might be someone, is 70% right, or 80 or 90 or whatever. But when we're looking at trying something new, rather than thinking, okay, I need to get this right, I need to figure this out, I need to take a step to sort this out, and I need to improve my mental health, or I need to improve my performance, and resilience is going to help that. Actually, look at it like an experiment. So thinking, okay, here are some things that I could do. So, it could be, I want to reduce my stress levels, for example. So the first step is knowing where that's showing up and how that's showing up. So it's that kind of self-awareness part and working on that. And the next step is trying things that are going to help with that. Don't assume you have the right idea, and don't wait around until you have the perfect idea. Test stuff, give it a go. So you're not looking at it like, right, I'm going to practice some silence, for example. I feel like I need to build some of that into my life, or it would help me. Rather than thinking this is the solution, think about, could this be the solution? Okay, I'm going to try this for a week. I'm going to do it every day for a week, and I'm going to see how that feels. It's not really working for me. Okay, I'm going to try something else. But it takes the pressure off finding the right answer and the right solution. And when things then don't work, which quite often they don't, we're learning. If we knew the right thing to do all the time, we'd be experts in everything, and we're not. But when the right thing doesn't work, you cross it off your list. You're like, okay, didn't work, going to try something else.
Gemma, the trying period, how long do you suggest that people try something new? Meditation, walking every day, listening to something motivating, whatever the activity may be. How long do you want our learners to stick with it?
In all honesty, this again will change per person. There's that theory out there that it takes 21 days to create a habit. I don't know how sound that research is. I've seen kind of both sides of that.
Questionable.
It's questionable. I don't know, but it's a great number to use. I would say you need to give something at least a couple of weeks ago. And also, I think you'll kind of know if you really do commit to something. I think you'll know within a couple of weeks if it's definitely not working, and if it's definitely not working, you have to just kind of keep going. It's like going to the gym, or it's like starting that process, or starting running, or taking up something new. It's really uncomfortable when you start it. It's horrible when you get back into. I think about after having babies, for example, getting back into the gym is horrendous. I've never really felt like myself, and my strength had gone, and my fitness, but I had to do it, and I had to commit to that for months before I'd see any kind of real progress. So it could be months, but I think you have to, I actually recommend at the end of every week having this reflection period of looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked so well, what are you going to do next week? Because say like going to the gym, even if it hasn't worked, I still don't feel particularly strong, but do you know what? This week I actually did it, and I feel good that I did it. That's enough for it to be something that worked to keep you going. Again, it's not looking at that end result. It's looking at, do I feel better about myself doing it? Okay, I'll keep doing it. So I don't think there is a set period, but I also think we do need to give things a good go, even when it's tough. So if you had these weekly reviews you can say to yourself, am I going to keep this going next week? And if I am, I've only got to commit to one more week. I don't have to commit to 5 months. Just for the next week, am I going to do this 3 times a week again? I think I can do that. I'll give it another go, until at some point you're like, nope, it's a definite no, or it's a definite yes. It's a habit that's in your life.
And it would be great to then at the end of a certain quarter or whatever, you have sort of your key resilience indicators that can. I'm imagining a journal where you write the adversity, and then how did you respond? How do you reflect? Who knows about it? What are you going to try to do, and how is it going? That's I'm thinking of that could be your next product that you have
potentially.
So Glauco is asking a really good question, because when you try at a later age to change your transition into another industry, you will probably be rejected, or maybe be passed over for someone maybe younger. However, or I would argue, you have so much more life wisdom and content knowledge than someone. But he's asking, how do you prepare yourself? What's the best strategy for people looking for a career transition? That's when you do need to be resilient. And most of it is because of change, or because of rejection, or that feeling of, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to fake like I know it, and then I'll figure it out. So what suggestion would you say works?
wherever you are in your job search in your life, there's going to be rejection. I could give you so many stories from my past that, you know, would scare me if I was starting again now.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I got through it. So I think the biggest tip here again is treat it like an experiment. You know, if I apply for this many jobs, how many interviews do I get? And it could be hundreds. I've been in that position. I've applied for hundreds of jobs before getting anyone even respond to to my application.
Yeah.
And it is, I often think if you can look at it like a bit of a game, a bit of an experiment, so it takes the personal bit out of it. It's not about you, it's about the process. And, looking at building genuine connections with people, talking to your network or people you care about what you want to do. I think the more we talk about things, sometimes someone knows someone or sometimes they don't. Sometimes it can take a while for this stuff to happen.
Sure.
But my biggest tip here is take the personal out of it. When people see an application, they're not seeing you as a person. They don't see all your qualities. They don't see all your experience and your personality and what you can bring. They're kind of seeing a bit of a profile of you, which is a really, really small part. So try and depersonalize that as much as possible when it does get challenging. And treat it like a bit of a game. I just got to keep applying.
And I would recommend for Glauco to reach out to maybe some forums or some groups of people that may be close to his age that are going through this. Quite often, it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel. The collective wisdom, someone may have been through that situation and can give us some tips or encouragement. We were together in New York just last week for an instructor reunion, and I'll never forget that Selena Rizvani, who's also working on a book, she said she got rejected for that book. And she strikes me as she's got her stuff together. I mean, she publishes in all these specifically very credible articles of her articles. And she got rejected, maybe she said 40 times in trying to publish her book. And she finally got a yes. So rejection is part of it. I know, at least I've trained our children to get rejected. So it's okay to be rejected. So you can work on your self-talk when that happens specifically too. I want to post the comment from Patricia, because when we work in the workplace, we control some of the way we respond to things. But when there's toxicity around us, it's very difficult and it consumes. I used to work in human resources, and it becomes the organization when one person or maybe a couple. How can you stay positive when it touched everyone around you? I have some thoughts on that, but I wondered if you wanted to weigh in on that first, Gemma.
I think it's important to know what you can control and what you can't. So you can control how you interact with people in that environment. You can control your relationships with others. You don't have to be toxic, even if the environment is. So that's something that, is part of you. But equally, as I've said kind of before today, sometimes you need to make changes. I work with organizations, that's my background.
Sure.
And culturally, a lot of it has to come from the leadership team or policies and practices, and because basically a culture in an organization is how we do things around here.
Yes,
it's like
absolutely.
Stepping into something, how do things work around here? What does it feel like? That's the culture of an organization, and you can affect your part and totally be accountable for that and responsible for that. That's really important. But equally, if it's not the right fit or it's not the right match, maybe it's not the right place.
And I would say for that's taking a bigger picture and a bigger step. There are times that I have been in organizations that drain my energy. And as a balance to that, I try to put things in my life and put energy towards things that feed energy and help sort of balance all this out. Because you can't be in a toxic situation at work and turn around and have to deal with things that are difficult or toxic or negative. Shed the negative people on top of that too, so you can protect yourself as well. This is really important. Gemma, you probably remember my friend from Australia, Peter Musafiriadis, who walked us to the meeting at the Empire State Building. But he's asking a great question on, does resilience intersect with well-being and sustainability? my first reaction is it is part of all of that. And based on the 6 pillars in Gemma's book, I think you would agree, correct?
Yes, absolutely. The sustainability part is a bit newer in terms of resilience, and it kind of depends what kind of resilience we're talking about, like individual or organizational.
Mm-hmm.
But the well-being part, there's tons of research out there with the link between well-being and resilience. So the idea is that the more resilient we are to adversity, so the more we can effectively, in whatever way that means for us, effectively deal with challenges, it means that we're less likely to be stressed, less likely to face burnout. There's also links with depression and anxiety as well. So kind of the more resilient you are, the less likely you are to have those things. However, what I will say is we sometimes have to be a little bit careful with resilience and stress, for example, and burnout in particular, because we often think resilience is getting your head down, pushing through, keep going. That's grit, basically. That's
perseverance,
passion and perseverance.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's part of resilience. Sometimes that is what we need to be resilient, but it's not the whole picture.
Sure.
And we have to be very careful, because sometimes I feel like we can do those things. And I've definitely done this, where you might think you're being resilient because you keep going, you keep pushing, keep doing more and more, potentially not listening to some of the signals in your body or relationships or stress, kind of how you're feeling. But also it comes out physically quite often as well. And if you keep pushing, even if you think you're being resilient, I've got to keep going and being resilient.
Sure.
You might not be, because you might end up at burnout. So you have to be really careful. So there is a relationship between resilience and well-being for sure, but we have to be careful not to push the resilient side of things, where it could become a little bit toxic potentially. And actually that can then massively impact our well-being in a negative way.
It'd be so interesting to research, and maybe this is where we pull in my husband. I was just texting him after this because you posted online today on Instagram how you were on a walk and talked about how getting outside, I know some of our learners, John mentioned this too, going on a walk and just being in nature and breathing air and getting some vitamin D changes your perspective literally, but also it allows you to breathe in some health and some well-being for you. And I wonder if the combination of movement and doing something good for yourself increases your well-being, which increases your quotient of resilient when something is difficult. But I do know that for many of our learners, when you go through a difficult time, the last thing you probably think about is taking care of yourself. And that's a critical thing too. Interesting. Our friend says, how do you work on managing strong emotions and impulses to inculcate resilience? I'm not sure if he means of how do you stay positive, right? If you kind of shut down those negative thoughts.
Well, the thing is, you don't always have to. That's, this is what makes the topic so complicated. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to wallow for a little bit. And I definitely go through periods where things might go wrong or be very overwhelming, and I know I'm wallowing, and I'm giving myself the day. There's been days where I've like cut all work where I can. Obviously I can't, things I've got to deliver, I've got to do. Or I might be like, do you know what? I'm going to go to bed early and wallow and watch a sad film, or I don't know.
Sure.
And that's okay. I think that's okay to manage those emotions in some way. But sometimes we do need to change the way we're thinking. So if you find yourself in a negative thinking rut where you're always worst case scenario, or always thinking the worst, or you're always thinking like this always happens to me, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, then sometimes changing your thoughts and retraining yourself to think, actually, what's the best case scenario, or what's the medium case scenario? The average of it. It's probably not as bad as where your head's going. Sometimes that can be really helpful, but it's kind of knowing where you need to go with that as well, and also what's going to work for you. Because I mentioned earlier toxic positivity. If you try and change your thoughts to nope, everything's amazing, I'm not going to acknowledge that that's hard, or I'm not going to talk about it, actually that can be really damaging as well. Because you might not be dealing with something that needs dealing with, or might need changing.
Sure. So as we come to the closing end of our time together, and I feel like with all the comments, we will go back and comment on some of your questions if we didn't respond. But the takeaways here is be patient with yourself, be loving to yourself, and give yourself what you need to be stronger as you face some of that adversity. And as Gemma said, recognize that it's never going to be a goal. It's not like learning a language and being fluent. Life will ask you to pull in your resources and change that threshold, those reserves, or you will be, flying high and being very happy without any adversity, which probably would not make you very resilient in the long run. So there has to be a little bit of that struggle. So I love that so many of you attended today. I would highly recommend checking out this great book and the Resilience Edge that Gemma is involved with. I see a resilience journal coming out in the future. I made it up because Gemma is the godmother of Stronger, our newsletter. I might as well come up with a good idea for you as well.
Aww.
So, Gemma, any parting words for us today?
I think remember that it's a journey and you don't have to get it right. I'm a resilience researcher. This is like my life's work. I do not get it right. I'd say even not even 50% of the time would I say, oh, I feel really resilient today. And remember, that's not the goal. The goal is learning about yourself, understanding yourself a bit more, and getting some of these strategies, tools, tips, learning a bit more about resilience and the things that you can do, and basically testing them. Just give it a try. Embrace this experimental mindset. We don't know everything. We're not supposed to. Some things are lessons and we're supposed to learn from it, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And have good friends around, like I have you, to bounce things off of, to talk about what works and doesn't, or journal and put things out of your brain. The hard drive should not be full of all of this, because sometimes we tend to overthink all of this as well. Well, we're going to say goodbye to our learners. Follow both of our newsletters that we've posted. Gemma, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening with the family, and I cherish the time with you. And thank you to all of us for joining us. We will continue the conversation in the chat, and maybe we'll come back and tell you more. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.